Can a single day of testing redefine the internal perception of a team as iconic as Ferrari? What did Maranello see in Hamilton that left them speechless? Lewis Hamilton's arrival at Fiorano was one of those moments that, although lacking in external drama, resonate deeply in the silent history of a team. It was a seemingly simple scene. A driver enters the box, adjusts his gloves, exchanges a couple of words with his track engineer, and gets into the car. But each of those gestures contained incalculable symbolic weight. He wasn't just any pilot. It was Lewis Hamilton. And it wasn't just any team. It was Ferrari. The combination of both evoked a contained tension, a mixture of skepticism and hope, both within the team and among the millions of eyes that, from a distance, followed each frame filtered from the Fiorano fences. From the first meters traveled, the engineers realized that they were witnessing something unusual. Hamilton didn't just drive, he translated. What for many drivers is expressed in vague sensations such as, the car does not turn, or the rear axle does not respond, in Hamilton became structured data, mechanical interpretations, and concrete proposals. When stopping after the first short stint, he did not ask for generic changes. He questioned the behavior of the front suspension under intermittent lateral loading, mentioned a front aerodynamic transition that seemed to anticipate the optimal moment, and suggested a different sequence in the management of electrical deployment during corner exit. This perplexed even the most experienced Maranello engineers. Not because they did not know the systems, but because, for the first time in a long time, someone external to the daily technical process gave them a fresh vision, with surgical precision, without the burden of vices acquired by years of cyclical development of the car. It was as if Hamilton, not having been part of SF26 in its gestation, could clearly see its strengths and weaknesses without prejudice or presumptions. Furthermore, his ability to compare the current car with his experience at Mercedes was pure gold for the analysts. Hamilton spontaneously described how the Ferrari's front axle offered a higher level of agility than the W14 at low speed, but at the cost of some instability in the transition to medium speed, which opened a window of optimization in the mapping of active aerodynamics. For Ferrari, accustomed to working within its own parameters, this was like opening a new roadmap. But perhaps most striking was the human effect of his presence. He didn't raise his voice, make demands, or mark territory. And yet, his every word reorganized the team's attention. The mechanics refined the details more. Engineers were re-evaluating their approach. The strategists were already thinking about how to adapt the race phases to the strategic reading of a driver who, on his first day, demonstrated that he understood the car as if he had driven it for years. It wasn't about speed at Fiorano. It was about influence. And Hamilton, without even trying, altered the emotional and technical axis of the team in a single day. It all starts with the new aerodynamic architecture. The SF26 abandons the ground effect concept that dominated the 2022 to 2025 era. Instead, it opts for a more traditional cargo model, but with a radical twist: active aerodynamics. This is not a moving wing on a straight line like the DRS. It is a complete system that modifies the behavior of the car in real time, adapting the aerodynamic flow dynamically according to the situation. The front wing, in particular, is a piece that looks like something out of an experimental wind tunnel, with moving sections designed to change the way air impacts both the flat bottom and the front axle. It is aggressive, almost provocative, and requires perfect synchronization between software, sensors, and pilot. The most impressive thing is not only the complexity of the system, but its integration. Ferrari has drastically reduced the size of the gearbox, miniaturizing components to extreme levels, allowing the rear package to be completely redesigned. Thanks to this, the batteries and intercoolers have been repositioned in a more compact way, generating a lower center of gravity and more controlled thermal efficiency. And all this fitted into a clean body without unnecessary appendages, where even the airbox, that traditionally high point, has been redesigned with aerodynamic cannons that redirect the airflow to specific areas of the diffuser. But the key is in the numbers. The car is just 2 kilograms away from the new minimum regulatory weight of 770 kilograms, including driver, fluids, and ballast. In Formula One, this difference can mean the possibility of placing strategic weight in areas that modify the dynamic behavior of the car. Having such a wide margin of ballast is an invisible weapon, but devastating if you know how to exploit it. This entire redesign has been possible thanks to cross-learning from the Hypercar 499P program. Ferrari has applied its experiences at Le Mans to the design of the SF26, especially in the energy management of the hybrid system and the electronic architecture. This recycling of know-how has allowed the Spec A, the base version of the car we saw at Fiorano, to now have a level of system car integration that many other teams will only reach after half a season. However, not everything is optimism. A design so light and so tight to the structural limit also represents a latent risk in terms of reliability. There are components in this car that border on the structural minimum allowed. And in a completely new regulation, that's a high-risk gamble. In addition, the first voices from the paddock suggest that Mercedes and Red Bull could have found more efficient ways to interpret the rules of the energy compression system, which could give them an advantage in the deployment of power on the straight. But when it comes to the technical basis, the SF26 is undoubtedly the most ambitious and defined project that Ferrari has presented in more than a decade. It is not an evolution of the past. It is a declaration of intent, light, aggressive, flexible, and with a clear path of evolution already outlined in phases Spec B in Bahrain, Spec C in Melbourne. For the first time in years, Ferrari is not reacting to the championship. He's trying to dictate his rules. Even in the engineering room, where technical pragmatism tends to drown out any emotional reaction, his presence altered dynamics. When he got out of the car and took off his helmet, the first thing he did was not go to the data monitor. He would walk up to the chief engineer and share impressions in human language, not just numerical. Then, once all that was translated into measurable variables, it accompanied the analysis with a level of precision that opened internal debates about whether CFD, computational fluid dynamics, models were underestimating certain aerodynamic loads and curve transitions. It was, in the words of one analyst, like having telemetry with a soul. But the real change came in the pride of belonging. It's not that Ferrari had lost its identity, but it had spent years searching for external validation that the Italian press punished again and again. Hamilton, accepting the challenge of joining the team in a rebuilding phase, acted as a mirror for the entire organization. His decision was perceived as an affirmation that Ferrari remains a place where something historic can be built, and that lifted the spirits of departments that often feel in the shadows of the glamour of the track. The simulator managers, the CFD designers, the night pit mechanics. They all felt that their work now had a direct window into history. The day in Fiorano was officially presented as a filming day, a day of recording for publicity and systems verification purposes. However, everything in that session pointed to something much deeper. Although the car traveled just 15 kilometers, the limit allowed for this type of event, what happened on that short journey had enormous symbolic and strategic value. It was not a simple day of filming. It was a general rehearsal of the Ferrari 2026 project. And what was validated there were not times or configurations, but the incipient link between a new car philosophy and a driver who, for the first time, seemed to speak the same language as the machine. The famous episode of the car stopped on the track went viral on social networks, generating immediate speculation about possible technical failures. But the truth was very different. It was a planned stop, part of an internal protocol to practice starting procedures from scratch, simulate restart conditions and preserve the authorized kilometers. In other times, a Ferrari stopped at Fiorano would have been cause for scandal. This time it was a control sample. The team was so sure of the condition of the car that they even used the day as coordination training between the pits and the driver, something that is usually reserved for official tests. This organizational calm reflected a level of maturity rarely seen at Ferrari at the start of a regulatory cycle. But the true meaning of the day goes beyond what is seen or measured. The essential thing was invisible. For the first time in years, the Scuderia did not seem to be improvising. The day showed that Ferrari arrives at the new regulations not as a follower, but as a central actor in the technical narrative. Hamilton, rather than simply adapting to SF26, was actively involved in validating its principles. And that seemingly trivial gesture of the driver validating the concept, not just the result, is what makes the difference between a car that is driven and a car that is co-created. In fact, one of the most interesting takeaways from the day was how Hamilton interpreted the car's active aerodynamics. Although some external analysts described the system as rough in its transition, that is, with a somewhat abrupt response when modifying the aerodynamic profile, the British not only adapted, but offered suggestions on how to smooth these transitions through adjustments in the deployment software. This shows a confidence that is rare to see on a first day. He didn't just react to what the car did. He proposed how to do it better. And that is key. In Fiorano, it was not about looking for speed, nor about evaluating configuration. It was about establishing a foundation of trust. The engineers wanted to know if their interpretation of the new regulation made sense when it came out of the wind tunnel and onto real asphalt. They wanted to know if the sensors were correctly reading the behavior of a car with redistributed masses, radical suspensions and energy managed by complex algorithms. and they wanted to know if the man who will pilot it for the next few years was capable of being more than an extension of the wheel. And it was. With just a few laps, without pushing the pace and under cold and wet track conditions, Ferrari validated something more important than any technical data. It validated that its conceptual bet has an interlocutor who understands it, who can guide it, and above all, who can turn it into a winning machine. If the SF26 is a technical symphony, Fiorano was its first note in tune. And Hamilton, without raising his voice, became the conductor of that orchestra that was still silent, but ready to play. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.